and welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to another episode of Mystery Monday. I am so excited to be back into the grind of doing these videos again and researching. I have really been enjoying and finding it super interesting. It takes me back to my criminology days in university. I don't know, I think I've only mentioned this in the very first Mystery Monday that I did, but I used to go to university. I did a double degree of criminology and psychology. I found it so interesting. Like, it was such a great course to do. I definitely recommend it to you guys. Every time I had a criminology class, I just remember every single day I had a lecture or a tutorial, I would be so excited. I would always get there, well, I would get there 5 minutes late so I didn't have to sit next to anyone, but I would always literally stay after class so that I could listen to the after class discussions because I just found it so interesting. I did so well in uni because I loved doing the assessment. Like, I found the assessment so interesting because obviously in criminology your assessments pretty much always involve criminal cases because you're doing a criminology degree. So I did so well in uni because I just loved it. I loved what I was doing. Talking about it makes me want to go enroll in uni again. I don't know why I brought this up right now. I just doing this and being back into it and not pressuring myself is making me so happy, and I'm so happy to be doing Mystery Mondays again. So without babbling on any longer, I'm just gonna go ahead and get into today's case. And today we are going to be talking about the disappearance of Joan Risch. So Joan was born on the 12th of May in 1930 in Brooklyn, New York, and she was born by the name Joan Caroline Bard. And Joan actually had a pretty traumatic childhood, I would say. When Joan was 9 years old, her family moved to New Jersey, and not even a year later in 1940, so she was still 9 years old, her parents died in what could only be described as a suspicious house fire. And not long after this happened, Joan, as reported by the Boston Globe, told an acquaintance or a friend that she had actually been sexually abused as a child. And I am assuming from what I read that this sexual abuse was at the hands of her family. So after this death, Joan went to live with her aunt and uncle who formally adopted her, and after they did, she ended up taking their last name and becoming known as Joan Nattrass, and I believe it's pronounced Nattrass. And she ended up confirming this officially by getting a social security number with her new name. So despite her traumatic childhood, she actually ended up growing up with a pretty normal life. She went to school, and in 1952 she graduated from Wilson College in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, with a degree in English literature because Joan actually had a massive passion for literature. In her spare time, she was always reading and she was always writing. So after she graduated, she then managed to luckily secure herself a job in a publishing company as a secretary, and then moving up, she got a job supervising the secretarial pool, and then she ultimately became an editorial assistant at Harcourt, Brace and World, and then later at Thomas Y, I think it's pronounced Crowell and Co. And this is where she met Martin Risch, and Martin Risch and her really hit it off. They fell in love, and in 1956 they got married. After they were married, they moved to Ridgefield in Connecticut together, and then a year later they welcomed a baby girl into the world named Lillian. And then after they welcomed their daughter into the world, Joan actually ended up quitting her job and became a housewife looking after the children and the home. And then in 1959, the family welcomed a baby boy into the world, and his name was David. After David's birth, the family actually moved again in 1961, and they moved to Lincoln in Massachusetts, where they lived on Old Belford Road, and they actually fit in really, really well. They were quite popular where they lived and were friends with all of the neighbors and stuff like that. And Martin became an executive at the Fitchburg Paper Company and was often traveling interstate for business. And Joan was very active in the community while still taking care of her home and her children. She became part of the League of Women Voters. And this was basically like an organization that allowed women to participate in larger roles in public affairs after they won the right to vote. But Joan had expressed how she wanted to eventually become a teacher once her children were older, because at this stage they were just 2 and 4 years old, because she wanted to share her love of literature. Okay, so this is where the actual case itself begins, and this case is strange. I feel like strange is not, it's not the right word to describe it. Like, strange is an understatement. But basically on October 4th in 1961, just a few months after the family had moved to Lincoln, Joan disappeared. So let's just go through all of the events that happened leading up to her disappearance on the 24th of October. So the day pretty much started like any normal day. They were doing normal things. Everything was normal. Like, I just can't describe it. It was like literally the most normal day. Martin woke up at 6:50 a.m. because he had to get to the Logan airport because he was flying out on an 8 a.m. flight to New York for business that day, which is just about the same time, about 7 a.m.-ish, when Joan got up and started waking the kids up and serving them breakfast. So after her children had finished eating, she called up her friend Sabra Morton, just like any normal day, just to have a friendly chat. And then she went over to her friend Barbara Barker's house just to drop David off so she could babysit him while she went and ran a few errands with her daughter Lillian. She took Lillian in her 1951 blue Chevrolet and went to the dentist to have a cavity filled. She then booked an appointment for the 31st, the following week, and paid $40 in cash. She then went to the W.L. Grant department store where she bought some pajamas for her son and a bra for herself, and once again she paid for this in cash. At the same time, around about, the milkman and the newspaper guy both came and delivered the newspaper and the milk to her house, both of which would later report that there was nothing out of the ordinary at their house. It all seemed to be pretty fine from the outside. She then went to pick David up from Barbara's house and arrived home at about 11:15 a.m. A few of the locals confirmed this, and they said that Lillian and Joan both looked pretty cheery, a little bit tired from the errands they had been running that morning, but generally cheery and nothing unusual to note. Then sometime between 11:15 and 11:45, Walton Kohlberg came by to pick up Martin's suit. So he was their dry cleaner, and Martin often had his suits dry cleaned with him. Martin also noted that Joan often left the front door unlocked, so he came in, had a quick chat with Joan, picked up the suits, and then left. And once again, he would later report that there was absolutely nothing unusual to report. Joan seemed friendly, the house seemed all in order, and that was that. After this, Joan changed into some more formal clothes than she was wearing to the dentist, so she changed into a blue dress and some white sneakers. She then made lunch for the children, and at around 12 p.m. she put David in his crib for his usual nap. So he would normally nap, I think it was from about 12 to 2 p.m. And after she did this, Barbara came over with her 4-year-old son Douglas, because Douglas and Lillian were the same age, so they would often have play dates together. So Barbara dropped him off, she went back to her own house, and Lillian and Douglas were having a play date in the driveway of Joan's house. So while David was sleeping and while the 2 children were playing, Joan was looking after the house. She did the dishes and she did some gardening. So she watered all of the plants, she kind of sheared them a little bit, and once she was done, that was pretty much the last normal thing she did that day. So this is basically the time where things start to get really strange. So she finished with the plants at about 2 p.m. and once she was done, she took Lillian and she took Douglas over to Barbara's house without telling Barbara. So Barbara had no idea that the kids were in her yard. She dropped them off at a swing set in their backyard where they didn't have a view of Joan's house, so they have no idea what happened in this time. There's a lot of time here that is unaccounted for, and we can pretty much only speculate what happened. And when she dropped them off, she told Lillian that she will be back in a hurry, but she never came back. 15 minutes later, at around 2:15 p.m, Barbara is in her kitchen, and her kitchen has sort of a view to Joan's house. There's a few trees in the way here and there, but she's standing in her kitchen and she looks out of her window to Joan's house. And what she sees is Joan in a trench coat, and she has her arms outstretched with a red unidentified object, and she's hurrying. And I believe she was hurrying from where her car was towards her garage, or it could have been the other way around, from her garage to her car. Now at the time, like I said before, Barbara had no idea that the children were in her backyard, so this just seemed like nothing out of the ordinary. She just thought that Barbara was playing with the children. Like I said, her view was kind of obstructed by a few trees in the way, so for all she knew, the children were there and they were playing like a chasing game or something. And this is the last confirmed sighting of Joan. At around 2:45 p.m, a witness said that she saw someone wearing the same clothes as Joan was described as wearing along Route 2A, and apparently she was kind of just wandering aimlessly. She was hunched over as if she was cold, but she was wearing a trench coat, and it was about 45 degrees Fahrenheit at the time. She was also described as looking untidy. So at around 3 p.m, Virginia Keene, she was the daughter of one of the neighbors of the Risch family, said she was getting off the school bus and noticed an unfamiliar car in the driveway of the Risch family's home, and she said that it was a two-toned sedan and it was blue and beige. And then another 5 minutes after this, a neighbor said that they had to stop to let a car, an unfamiliar two-toned sedan, out of either the Keene or the Risch family driveway, and both Virginia and her mum were both adamant that there was no car in their driveway at this time. And the same car had also been reported by the milkman 5 days earlier. Well, he didn't report it 5 days ago, but when they were interviewing him, he mentioned that he had seen the car 5 days earlier, or a car matching that description. And another neighborhood resident said that they also saw a car matching this description at around 4:15 p.m. on Route 2A near Old Belford Road. And Old Belford Road, as I mentioned, is the road that the Risch family lives on. So jumping back a little bit in time, because I forgot to mention this, but between 3:15 and 3:30, someone spotted a woman on Route 128, and she was matching Joan's description again, wearing the trench coat. She was said again to be kneeling over and clutching something near her stomach, or clutching her stomach, and there was blood running down her legs. And the same woman was spotted at 4:30 p.m. on Route 128 again, and this time she was near a construction site. So at around 4 p.m. is when Barbara notices that the kids are actually at her house, and she actually has errands to run with Douglas. She needed to go grocery shopping, so she drops Lillian back at Joan's house. Assuming Joan was inside, she just dropped Lillian at the driveway to let Lillian go inside herself, because as I've mentioned in this video already, Joan does leave the front door unlocked, so Lillian was capable of getting inside herself. She goes grocery shopping. She gets home at about 4:15 p.m. to find Lillian in her yard, and Lillian says that Mummy is gone and the house is covered in red paint. So of course Barbara goes to check this out. She leaves Lillian and Douglas at her house, goes to check out Joan's house, and immediately walks in and realizes that it is the state that Lillian described it in, except I'm sure you can imagine that rather than red paint, it was actually blood. Blood was smeared all over the walls and floors of the kitchen, and when she got in there, she heard David crying because his diaper needed to be changed. So she goes up there, and on her way up, she notices that the blood is not just in the kitchen, it's trailing up to the master bedroom, which is where David is. Immediately, Barbara calls the police at 4:33 p.m. and the police arrive within 5 minutes of getting the call. The police, after being described the scene over the phone, assumed that this was a suicide, so they were anticipating a dead body. But of course, when the police got there, Joan was nowhere to be found. When they arrived, they immediately noticed how strange the scene looked. They traced the blood from the kitchen up the stairs into the master bedroom and then back out to the driveway. It was on both the hood and the trunk of Joan's car, and then going out of the driveway, it mysteriously disappeared. So back to the scene of the kitchen, there was a table that was overturned, and the weirdest part was there was a phone, which normally was like mounted on the wall, but it was actually ripped from the wall, put in a bin, and this bin that it was put in is usually underneath the sink, but instead it was in the middle of the kitchen. There was also a phone book found near the phone, and the phone book was open to the emergency services page, and from what I can gather, this was kind of like a homemade phone book, like, you know, ones that maybe your parents have where they write all of their friends' numbers and maybe emergency contacts for if anything happens, because keep in mind, I don't believe there was a 911 at this stage, so they had an emergency contacts page. But, and this is why I think it was like a homemade one, because there was no emergency contacts written down, the page was blank. So of course the blood was sampled, and it was a match to Joan's blood type, which was blood type O, but they couldn't definitively say that it was her blood. There were, weirdly enough, no footprints throughout the house or throughout the blood. Nobody had stepped in the blood if they had been inside, which obviously somebody had been inside. Even the person that was bleeding at some stage would have been in there, but there was no footprints, and it was estimated that there was about a pint of blood throughout the house. It was also obvious that somebody had tried to clean up the blood with some sort of towel and a garment, like a dress, and nobody could figure out where the trail of blood began and where it ended, although they did kind of say that it ended at the driveway because that's where the trail of blood disappears. They also found a partial thumbprint and palm print, neither of which matched to Joan. So these were somebody else's palm and somebody else's thumbprint in the house, which means that somebody else had been there at the time of whatever happened to Joan. Authorities also called all the local hospitals and asked if they had seen anyone matching Joan's description or wearing whatever Joan was wearing at the time. None of them had, so they asked them to contact authorities if a woman matching her description did check herself in. So I'm sure you can imagine, and as I'm sure any reasonable person would, after finding all of this evidence, the police suspected that there was some sort of foul play involved. And so the search began for Joan because she was nowhere to be found. There was no body, so she had to be somewhere. They had heaps of police, military personnel, and even helicopters looking for Joan in the woods and in nearby waterways and just the surrounding areas to the neighborhood that she was in. But of course, nobody found Joan. And Martin, who was originally planning on staying the night in New York on his business trip, got the news and was of course shocked and immediately flew back home. First things first, of course, the police compiled a list of possible suspects. The first of which being Martin, but of course he was cleared pretty quickly. They had a happy marriage according to everyone who knew them, neighbors, family, friends. They also questioned the mailman, the milkman, and the delivery guy from the dry cleaning store, but all of these were dead ends and all of these people were cleared as well. There were two more notable suspects, one of which was Robert Foster. So he worked for the National Park Service, and what the National Park Service was trying to do at the time was create a national park, basically. It was called the Minutemen Historical National Park, and basically they wanted to like acquire or buy some of the houses in the area, including Joan's and her neighbors, so that they could create this national park. He spoke with Joan on the 25th of September, and he also spoke to a few of her neighbors at this time as well, all of whom said that he was a bit pushy and had overstayed his welcome when clearly nobody wanted to give up their homes. But this lead was dismissed because he did have a strong alibi, which was confirmed by his co-worker, which brings us on to the next suspect. So this guy became a suspect when they were trying to figure out who this car belonged to, the two-tone sedan that everybody had reported as seeing near the Risch house. It traced the car back to a guy named Harold Munda, and Harold was an outpatient from a hospital in Bedford. So he was seen at 4:15 p.m. exiting his car on Route 2A. So the weirdest thing about this guy gets out of his car on Route 2A, walks into the woods, cuts a few branches off the trees, and then puts them in his car and then just drives away. 6 hours after this happened, so at around 10 p.m., a cab company called the police to report this guy, Harold, as being suspicious. I think he was like sending a telegram to his brother or something, and they said he was acting really sus while doing it. But I'm not sure why, and I couldn't figure out the reason, but this lead was also dismissed. Every single lead that the police pursued turned out to be dead ends, and there was literally nothing for 2 years. So this person named Serene Gerson, who was a local reporter for the Lincoln newspaper, it's called the Fence Viewer, he went to the local library. He found out some really interesting information at the library, and although no new leads came from this, it almost made the case more confusing and more interesting, and it brought a lot of questions. So what he discovered was that a few months before Joan's disappearance, she had checked out 25 books from the library, which she loves literature, right? So this is nothing out of the ordinary, really. Well, every single one of these books is related to crime and mystery, and every single one of them in particular is related to murders and disappearances. And all of these books have someone trying to disappear on their own, or staging a disappearance, staging a murder so they can disappear. There was one book in particular, and this was called Into Thin Air, which Joan checked out in September before she disappeared. And this book was so similar to her circumstances. So basically, it was about this woman. She disappeared from her home, and the only evidence in her home were blood smeared towels and like blood, which was, it was like, it's creepy. It was creepy how similar Joan's case was to this book that she checked out. Like I said, despite how eerily similar this is and how weird it is that she just happened to check these books out a few months before she disappeared, there were no new leads. And there never really were any more new leads. There was a lot of people over the years who called the police and claimed that they had spotted Joan, but none of these led to anything. There's only theories. So of course, I'm gonna tell you guys all of the theories one by one, and I'm gonna start off with the first theory, which I don't believe, that's why I'm telling you, like getting it out of the way now, is that Joan was kidnapped. So basically, it's possible that somebody entered the house because, like I said, many times I think, she left the door unlocked, so it's possible they just entered her house and there was a struggle between the two of them. She could then have been forced into a car for unknown reasons, which explains why the blood trail ends at the end of the driveway. It would also explain the two-toned car, but it really doesn't explain anything else in the case. So the next theory is that Joan was assaulted. I kind of feel like this is similar to the kidnapping one, really. So the theory goes that she may have been or may have gotten a severe injury from her attacker, causing her to bleed, which could have caused some sort of amnesia or something, and she might have managed to escape for a short while, or maybe the reason the blood ended at the driveway was maybe because it started there, so maybe that's why they assaulted her. And it would also explain the possible sightings of her along Route 2A and along Route 128. It's possible that the attacker left or maybe caught up to her and grabbed her while she was walking along these routes and maybe hid her body or finished off the job. Another theory is that this was self-inflicted, or there was some sort of medical emergency, and the severe loss of blood could have left her disoriented or, once again, with amnesia. So maybe she was walking because it was self-inflicted, or maybe something happened at home, like some sort of freak accident, so she was walking to try and find help, but she was disoriented or had amnesia. It is possible that because she had amnesia or because she was disorientated, she had no idea where to go. It would explain why she was on these routes And it could also be that while she was disorientated, she was losing a lot of blood. Maybe she went into the construction site that she was spotted near and bled out there. Maybe the construction workers didn't notice her and it built over her or uncovered her by accident. And maybe if it was amnesia, she wandered off and just has no idea who she is, and she started a completely new life without even meaning to. The one thing this doesn't explain, or the two things actually, is the two-toned car and the unidentified thumbprint and handprint in the house. Another possibility is that she suffered a mental break. This again doesn't explain the handprint or the thumbprint, and there was no history of mental illness in her family, and it would have been a very, very quick onset if that was the case, so it doesn't really make a lot of sense. So this brings us to our next theory, and this is actually the one that I believe the most, and the one that I think is the most logical, and that is that she was pregnant. And there's actually a few theories within this theory. So I'll start by mentioning that at this time, abortion was illegal and insanely frowned upon. I mean, it was illegal, so of course it was frowned upon. But not only was it illegal, it was extremely dangerous for the mother if she did manage to have like an at-home doctor do this. So when it did happen, it was obviously always carried out in secret. And if anything went wrong during the procedure, which was a possibility, the best thing for the doctor to do would be to dispose of the body for multiple reasons. First, they would lose their medical license, meaning they would lose all sorts of income and their job. And also they would get charged with multiple things, such as carrying out an abortion, which is illegal, and for murder or manslaughter. So as I said, there's two theories within this theory, or like multiple theories within this theory. There's kind of a lot of ways this could go, but I'm gonna get this first theory within the theory out of the way because I think it is the least likely scenario, and that is that Joan was pregnant, but with a baby that was not Martin, so from an affair. This seems unlikely to me for multiple reasons. First of all, they had just moved to the place, so that would be a very quick like affair that she got into. And secondly, she had two children that weren't in school. They were 2 and 4 years old. She didn't have any time on her hands, really. Like, it's like, when would she have the time to pursue another relationship or to pursue something? And like, where would she have met them? But basically the theory goes that she was having a child or was pregnant with a child from an affair, and so she had a doctor come to abort the child so that her husband wouldn't find out, and it went wrong and she hemorrhaged, and so the doctor disposed of her body. Now, this is the second theory within this theory, and this is what I think is the most likely, and that is that she was pregnant with her husband's child, but she just didn't want to have the baby, and she didn't want her husband to find out about the baby because, like I said, she wanted to become a teacher when her children were older, and she didn't want to prolong it, and maybe she just didn't want to look after another child. For whatever the reason may be, she didn't want to have a third child, so she didn't want her husband to find out that she was pregnant, and so she aborted the child. So she calls a doctor in to give her an abortion at her house, which is why she dropped Lillian and Douglas off at Barbara's house without telling Barbara, because how would she explain that to Barbara? She didn't want Barbara to know. She didn't want anybody to know at all. So the doctor comes in his two-toned sedan, which is like his car that he takes to these secret abortions so that nobody really knows. And they go to the bedroom, which a few drops of blood were found in there, and that is where the procedure begins. However, the procedure goes wrong, but she's not completely like bleeding out at this time. So she goes to check on her son David, which is why I believe there was a few drops of blood around his crib as well. So then after checking on David, she goes downstairs to get water because she's not completely bleeding at this time, like I said, but it is enough for her to become lightheaded, or maybe for her to start becoming worried. So then the doctor follows her down, and this is when they both begin to panic. Joan wants to call the emergency services because of course she's freaking out. She's probably bleeding really bad at this point. She's hemorrhaging and she doesn't want to die. She wants something to be done, so she wants to call the emergency services. But the doctor doesn't want this to happen because, what they're doing is illegal, and it's illegal on his behalf, so he could lose his medical license. So he rips the phone out of the wall so that she can't call and tosses it in the bin, which I'm not exactly sure, like I can't explain why the bin was in the middle there. But then the doctor might regret this, or the doctor decides that he does want to help, which is why the emergency services or the telephone book is open on the emergency services, but there isn't any numbers there for anyone to call. So then the doctor leaves, fearing that he could get in trouble for this if he is caught, if a neighbor comes over or something, and he could lose his license or go to jail. And Joan is left alone. And of course, Joan doesn't want anyone to know. So she starts cleaning it up with a towel and her own dress. And this would explain why Barbara saw her like outstretched arms hurrying to her car or to her garage with something that was red, because it could have been the thing that she was using to mop up the blood. And she then goes outside to drive herself to the hospital. She puts a trench coat on to hide the fact that she is bleeding, as she doesn't want anyone to see. But when she goes to the car to drive herself to the hospital, she realizes 2 weeks, so she takes off down the road on foot, which is why she's spotted on the Route 2A and Route 128. It's possible that because of the loss of blood, she may have become disorientated. It would also explain why the sightings of her on the highway depicted her like clutching at her stomach and with blood running down her legs. So either she became disorientated, didn't know where she was going, maybe she fell into the construction site, or the doctor drove past her or came back from her, brought her into his car and decided to dispose of the body, finish off the job and dispose of the body so that nobody found out. Another theory within the pregnancy theory is that maybe there was no doctor involved at all. Maybe she tried to give herself an at-home abortion. But this doesn't explain the two-toned car in her driveway, and it also doesn't explain the fingerprints that were found inside her house. Although maybe she could have realized that something was going wrong and so she called someone to her house, but it doesn't explain the phone being ripped off the wall. I do think the doctor's scenario is the most likely. It pretty much explains everything. It would also explain why there was no footprints, because I imagine a doctor would want to be extremely careful and wouldn't want to get any footprints in the blood so that they could trace it back to him. But yeah, that's definitely the theory that I think is the most likely. Another theory, which I do think, after hearing about the library thing and the books that she checked out and was reading, this is also a very likely scenario, is that she pretty much staged the whole thing herself because she wanted to go and basically start a new life. Because Joan knew so many people in her area, there were a few different accounts of what she was like. Some people said she was this absolutely family-orientated woman that was so in love with her family, so in love with her husband and her children, and that she was this devoted housewife, basically. And then there were these other accounts that she was this ambitious woman who was unfulfilled with being a housewife and wanted to do bigger things, you know, wanted to become a teacher or do something more with literature. And the rumors that stemmed about her childhood and her, because people obviously started talking after this happened, so the rumors about her childhood and the sexual abuse in her childhood also fueled this theory a lot. In the 1960s, divorce was practically unheard of unless there was a reason. So adultery or evidence of abuse or something along those lines, you pretty much could not get divorced, and it was very, very frowned upon. Well, it wasn't just frowned upon, like it literally couldn't happen. So it's possible that Joan was just tired of being a housewife and was feeling really unfulfilled, and so she wanted to go and start a new life on her own. And the last theory that I want to talk about is that somebody broke into Joan's house while she was out running errands with Lillian. I think this one's pretty unlikely, but as I've mentioned a million times, she did leave the front door unlocked, so it isn't impossible that somebody got into her house. So it is possible that while she was out, someone came in, and when they heard her get home, they realized the only way to get out was through the front door, through the garage. So they couldn't get out because she was there, so they stayed hidden upstairs in the master bedroom. So while she was outside with Lillian and Douglas, it's possible that the intruder heard this, so he kind of went to go have a look, and Joan saw something and saw a move. So being cautious, she went and dropped the kids off at Barbara's house and then came back to check out what was happening. And after she left, the intruder might have come to try and get out through the garage or the front door, which is when Joan got back from dropping the children off, and so there was some sort of encounter. So maybe then he leaves and Joan is there like trying to clean up her own blood and be fine, and you know, maybe leave to go and get herself checked out at a hospital and get help from the assault that just occurred. And maybe this guy realizes he doesn't want to get in trouble. Maybe he sees her as he's driving away and realizes that she's able to walk and is maybe going to the police or to a hospital and is going to be able to give a description of him, which would lead to him being arrested. Or maybe he left and then realized he needed to finish the job, so he came back and plucked her up off the side of the road and finished the job. Although there's so many things that don't add up about this theory, considering the two-tone car. Like, it wasn't there when she got home or when she was gone with Lillian. So why would there randomly be this two-tone car later, unless maybe the person who assaulted her after disposing of her body maybe came back in the two-tone car to kind of clean up the mess himself. Maybe it wasn't Joan that cleaned up the mess. That would explain the palm print and the thumbprint. Possible. But that is all of the theories. Martin and the two children went on to live pretty normal lives. Martin always tried to find Joan because he believed that Joan was still alive but had amnesia, so he never changed his home number until the day he died. He had that same home number in case she remembered something or found his number and decided to call him. But unfortunately, he never got any closure because he did pass away in 2009, which breaks my absolute heart. Like, I almost burst into tears when I heard that. He never remarried. He always believed in his heart that she was out there somewhere and that maybe she would one day call him. And that is the saddest part of the whole case to me. And yeah, I would love to know your thoughts. I would love to hear any theories that you guys have, or what theory you believe is the most likely. Yeah, that's the end of this video. So I really hope that you guys enjoyed today's video. Make sure to give it a thumbs up if you did enjoy and want more mystery videos from me. Also, make sure to comment down below and let me know any cases you want me to cover next week, and hopefully I will see you in my next video. Bye!